lawsuit, creating the court oversight. She says the state has made good efforts, but is still falling short.
It is very frustrating that this many years down the road, we're still seeing poor performance in the area of child safety.
State health department leaders say the court should end supervision of the Child Welfare Agency by the end of the year. The court is asking the department to work with monitors on a new plan to fix ongoing problems in the system. While more federal healthcare workers are coming to Michigan, many hospitals struggle to keep up with COVID demand and keep workers' morale up. Amy Robinson reports.
In the nearly 2 years since COVID-19 was declared a pandemic, healthcare officials have faced uncertainty, long hours, angry patients, and a status that has swung from hero to largely forgotten. Marita Hatton-Shipman is the president of My Michigan Health in Gratiot County. She says pandemic stress has taken its toll on workers and is likely to change healthcare into the future.
Our healthcare workforce is exhausted, and I don't think that when this pandemic is over, we're just going to go back to looking like we did before. And I don't know what that looks like yet. That's really where we as healthcare leaders need to be focusing now.
Adam Schiffman says her hospital has tried everything from incentive pay to silly things like a rubber duck hunt to keep workers' spirits from falling. I'm Amy Robinson.
Out there on the roads right now, we are looking just fine. Some slowdowns, 94 westbound between Connor and Gratiot. 94 eastbound is slow from 75 through Gratiot. And there's delays for trucks getting to and from Canada via the Ambassador Bridge right now. Maybe a snow shower around early tonight. Wind chill is going to be below zero. Sunny, a high near 18 tomorrow. And then mostly cloudy, a high near 27 on Thursday. Wind still a bit breezy.
This is Fresh Air. I'm Dave Davies, in today for Terry Gross. Our guest, Princeton African American Studies professor Imani Perry, was born in Birmingham, Alabama. Though she moved away with her family as a child and has lived in Cambridge, Chicago, and the Philadelphia area, she's always considered Birmingham home. Perry has a new book about the American South, written as a journey through its states, cities, and rural communities. In each chapter, she focuses on a place and reflects on its distinctive relationship to the region's history of slavery and racism, drawing on her own extensive knowledge of literature, music, art, and folklore, as well as her own family history. Imani Perry earned a bachelor's degree from Yale, then a law degree at Harvard, where she also received her PhD in American Studies. She's currently the Hughes Rogers Professor of African American Studies at Princeton and the author of 6 previous books, including Looking for Lorraine, a biography of playwright Lorraine Hansberry, and most recently, Breathe, a letter to my sons. Her new book is South to America, a journey below the Mason-Dixon line to understand the soul of a nation. Imani Perry, welcome to Fresh Air.
Thank you. I'm delighted to be here.
You are, as I said, a child of the South, a native of Birmingham, but now teaching in an Ivy League institution. What made you want to take this journey into the South? Where did this come from?
It has a couple of different origin points. I mean, one, of course, is it's my home, but I have spent my life in some ways in exile, much of the time in exile of the South, and I have been traveling back and forth the majority of my life, and I've had this experience of being both an insider and also seeing how the South is seen. And from a young age, experiencing some frustration about the misperception, but as an intellectual and a scholar over time, it just became increasingly clear to me that the misunderstanding of the South, the depiction of it as this sort of some other backwards different place in other regions, is actually part of the way in which we mischaracterize the nation. So that's sort of the heart of it. It both comes from frustration and also wanting to share and illuminate something.
The frustration that people see the South as some, how did you say, a distant, backward place?
Yeah, distant, backward. That's where racism is. That's where, social dysfunction is. That's where people are uneducated. And I mean, there's all these stereotypes of the South that I think are because the South in some ways becomes the repository for the nation's sins, right? Like that's the bad place down there. And then it allows the rest of the country to conceive of itself as relatively pristine, when in reality the South has so often not only not been backwards, but really the vanguard of the way the nation would develop, from the very outset, right? It's where it begins. A huge proportion of the founding fathers are Southerners. It's where D.C. is located because the South paid Revolutionary War debts, and then it's where the prosperity of the nation developed through King Cotton, and it's oil, it's coal, there are so many of the things that sort of made the nation possible that come out of the South, and the conditions that made it possible are the very things that are part of the painful history of the South that we try to sort of excise from the mythology of the nation, but are really key to understanding it.
You start in Harper's Ferry, West Virginia, where in 1859 people will remember that the abolitionist John Brown led this band of armed men hoping to spark a slave revolt. It didn't happen. They were all captured. He was hanged. Was it a conscious choice to begin there?
I mean, it was a conscious choice to begin in West Virginia because it's this unusual place that was separated from Virginia over the cause of slavery and then became the most whitest of the southern states and seen as a place that is, that people use the term sort of hillbilly and the kind of stereotypes of Appalachia there. So that's one reason I started there. So many people warned me not to go to West Virginia as a Black woman. So I was sort of intrigued by people suggesting I not go to West Virginia, and then also kind of nervous. And I said, well, Harper's Ferry, given its history, felt like, okay, this is a place that I can probably enter into relatively comfortably, although I went beyond Harper's Ferry. And it was one of those moments where I could come to a place and then understand that the simple historical association, John Brown, there's a much more complex story there in so many ways. It's about industry. It's about the Shenandoahs. It's about all of this abundance of that particular region and why John Brown was there and these intersecting histories. So it's a really rich place that's so much more complex than the stereotypes. Or just the image of John Brown, the stereotypes of Appalachia, or the image of John Brown. So I loved that trip.
And it's interesting that in 1859 it was in Virginia. West Virginia didn't exist
Did
at
not
the time.
yet exist,
So it's just across the line. And it's an interesting place. I've visited there. You spent some time speaking to a Confederate soldier reenactor who, I guess, was working in one of the historical buildings there.
It was great.
What was great about it?
First of all, part of when I was writing there was sort of kismet because, and I read a little bit about this, I had read Tony Horowitz's Confederates in the Attic, and I had these quibbles with it, and he was a really lovely man, but I had never talked to him about the book. I unfortunately didn't, get to talk to him about it before he died, and I just was like, I felt like he was romanticizing the Confederates, and I also felt like, this was a story that was from the perspective of the kind of, white lost cause sensibility that I wouldn't have access to. And then I go to Harper's Ferry and I wind up in this conversation with someone who is a Confederate reenactor. And it was a conversation I didn't expect someone being open to having with me as a Black woman. And it was really affable, but I was gentle with it, and he was initially skeptical, and then he started to talk to me about, the details. But I also was very aware that there was a barrier there, and much of the book is sort of dealing with encounters and across lines of difference and the complications of them. But that's so much of what life is like across the color line in the South, in the sense that there's an incredible intimacy, there always has been, and there's also a detente, right? There's some things that are very difficult to broach, and that was one of those moments. And there are multiple ones in the book.
You spend some time in Appalachia, and then you go to Maryland, which I guess, like West Virginia, is a state that is below the Mason-Dixon line, but was not a Confederate state. In Maryland's case, it was a pretty close battle about whether it would be. you think your ancestor from Maryland, Esther or Easter, may have been a runaway at some point. Is that right?
Yes.
And you write about something I had not heard of, the Great Dismal Swamp, where kind of fugitive slaves kind of established their own ongoing community. Tell us about this.
One of the interesting stories about it is,